Good afternoon, Tigers. While this time of year he may get requests to portray Old St. Nick, our speaker is most often characterized as a big, warm, fuzzy, politically ambiguous bear. Proving that the food in Tallahassee must not be all that bad, he rejoined the Florida Senate this year, supported in part by a reported $600,000 war chest. Now, while he owns a printing company, he has confirmed to me that not one of those dollars was therein printed. While his power and stature were recognized immediately with the chairmanship of the Senate's Transportation Committee and chair of the Pinellas County delegation and several other plum assignments, our speaker has not exactly endeared himself to leadership. In fact, the Sunshine State News called him left coast lovable and blamed him for being a fake Republican who single-handedly killed Senate President Herodopoulos' hard right agenda. A prominent blogger put it more bluntly, writing that he was, quote, the dark star in the Senate around which all clusters of dissent seemed to cluster. So, where does our speaker lie on major policy issues? He told the Miami Herald he was not for sale in reaction to supporting the reincarnation of leadership funds, which many see as open invitations for corrupt donations. And while a devout Baptist, he has signaled support for a drastic expansion of gambling via destination casinos due to the jobs. Though he has been a thorn in the side of current leadership, he's in the hunt for enough pledge cards to be future Senate President himself. Will he fall more in line this upcoming session to gain the last few pledges? What will he do next session? Will he support further efforts to privatize state operations and lands? What will his transportation fixes be? And is he that intimidated by the current Pinellas County Commission chairman that he will refrain from forcing a legislative fix to the fire EMS issue? It is often noted, Tigers, that in the hunting circles, on some days, you can get the bear. But as Dean Cannon, Mike Herodopoulos, and Rick Scott discovered last session, on some days, the bear gets you. My fellow Tigers, please give a warm holiday Tiger Bay welcome to Senator Jack Latvala.
Say, you know, there's only room for one smartass in a room. But then I looked around the room. You know, this is the time you all been waiting for. What in the world is he going to do? What's he going to say? Because you never know. You know, I'm reminded of the last time I came to Tiger Bay here. Some things don't change. We still got the same old guy as the timekeeper. But, you know, I tried to find a shirt. I don't know if any of you remember the t-shirt I wore the last time I came. It had a big target on the front of it. And, you know, bullseye. And I found the shirt, and I was going to, you know, put it on and wear it today. But the only thing it would make was make an armband today. You know, or a shoulder patch. So couldn't quite use the same shirt. You know, the reason I agreed to come, I know this group's got a really bad reputation as being inhospitable to speakers and so forth, but the main reason I agreed to come today is because I knew this was one place I could come and give a speech and not have to deal with any Tea Party people. But you haven't let them infiltrate here yet, so that's good. Can't go to a Republican club and say that anymore. You know, I'm really kind of disappointed. I think maybe even DeCamp left. Oh no, he's still back there. Okay. You know, usually come to you know, these meetings, and there's some, you know, executives from the Times who come, and you know, usually Paul is there, or Tim Nickens, you know, Joni James, my friends at the editorial board, and I don't see them here today, and that's kind of disappointing. But then I thought about, well, it's a little longer drive from Tampa to get here. But I did see, when I got here today, I saw my friend Ed Molinari, and you know, I really love Ed, and I'm looking for, he's a little guy, oh there he is over there. I really love Ed, he's one of my first supporters in St. Petersburg, and one of my best friends down there. And you know, the sad thing about the news yesterday with you know, American Airlines going into bankruptcy is that when they rework the labor agreement, the pilots have to start working again. We won't see as much Ed. Oh, by the way, I tested that on him to make sure that he would smile about what I said. You can go ahead and laugh. He's not self-conscious about that. But you know, we have enjoyed you being a part of the community, Ed, and when you retire, I'm sure you'll come back. You know, I retired. I tried to retire in 2002 when I left the Senate because of term limits, and I voted for term limits, one of the dumbest things I ever did in my life. And we're not going to talk about the other ones, but he already mentioned, sort of alluded to some of them. But you know, I retired. I thought I could just be a normal citizen. I got a little house up in Steenhatchee and built a car wash up there, and I was very happy going and taking the quarters out of the car wash. I always made sure that I counted them personally because I wanted to make sure the IRS got their full share. And I wouldn't let anybody else, I wouldn't trust them to anything like that. So, you know, I tried to retire, but you know, I got a lot of friends in Tallahassee, so, you know, once or twice during every legislative session, I'd go up there and hang out. And, you know, every year it seemed like what I heard about what was going on up there was just a little worse than the year before. I got people that would see me on the sidewalk up there, and, you know, people who I had done hand-to-hand combat, like the sugar companies and stuff like that, didn't like me worth a darn for my positions on issues, would just say, look, we need you back up here. You know, this process has gotten so bad, we need people like you that will stand up and say it the way you think it, and will not take pressure and be honest with people and so forth. And, you know, so each year got a little bit more of that. And, you know, I thought about it once or twice, but, you know, I finally in March of 2009, the kicker was the day that I got up and looked in the newspaper. And the brains in the Florida House of Representatives, not all of them, but the majority of the Florida House of Representatives had passed a bill allowing oil drilling 3 miles off my beaches in the Gulf Coast. And I said, you know, that is the low water mark. That is something that I am not going to let happen in Florida. And so that's the day I decided. Now, actually, a lot of people think I didn't decide to run again until I knew Charlie Justice was leaving. But actually, that's not true. I decided to run and started working on it before Charlie decided he was going to leave and challenge a weaker person, Bill Young. You know, I just decided I was gonna get back in the fray, and you know, so I ran, and with the support of a lot of wonderful people, a lot of folks in this room and throughout the county and in Hillsborough County who opened up their wallets and who signed petitions and all those kind of things. You know, I got back in, and I became the first person in the history of Florida to be term limited out of the Senate and come back to the Senate, which is allowed. And, you know, I knew it was going to be bad, but I really didn't know, you know, how bad. And I found when I got back there it was a little worse than I thought it was going to be. Now, some things were the same. All the problems. You know, schools are in the same or worse shape than they were when I left. PIP fraud, which I did a PIP fraud bill in 2001 as the chairman of the Banking and Insurance Committee. Well, we're still doing PIP fraud bills 11 years later. Still haven't quite found a solution to that. We still spend 80% of our time refereeing issues between one profession and another, one business and another, dog tracks and horse tracks, optometrists and doctors. You know, we still spend a disproportionate amount of our time doing that. But then there are some things that were different. You know, the all-you-can-eat lobbyist buffet was gone. So I gotta steal my cookies at events like this now. You know, we couldn't take a drink or have a meal with a lobbyist, but you could take a $100,000 check from them for the party or for your CCE or 527, you know, to help you get reelected. You know, no small stuff, but, you know, plenty of big stuff. You know, the term limits have created an atmosphere where it's all about moving up the next rung on the ladder. You know, you get there, even before you get there, you start running to be Speaker of the House, and then one out of a large group gets selected as Speaker of the House, and then all the other people in that year's group start running for something else because the only vote that counts in the House is the Speaker of the House. And so term limits haven't been good. And then the worst part of the term limits is that when you leave the House, they all came to the Senate. That's what I was prepared for. Because all the people who I spent a lot of time stepping on them when I was in the Senate and they were in the House, all of a sudden they're running the Senate. So they were really glad to see me. They had a welcome party for me. And but the whole process had changed to be more like the House. And the Senate that I knew and loved and cherished my role there for 8 years, of being an independent body where you could be a success in your community, you'd get elevated by your community to go up there, and they would expect you to work on their behalf, to stand up for the community, to use your experience and talents on behalf of the community, has changed to a body where you're supposed to show up there and do what you're told. And you know, as my mom, my 87-year-old mom will tell you to this day, I've never been too good at doing what I was told. And some of you probably know that. You know, what I found was, you know, a system of basically trying to control all the votes all the time, every day, committee on the floor, and just basically it was one agenda that counted, and that was the leadership's agenda. An individual member's agenda didn't count anymore. It was the leadership's agenda. And what does the leadership think about this? And what does the leadership want to do about this? And, you know, I had this peculiar, old-fashioned idea that I was supposed to be leadership from the day I was there, because that's what my community expected me to be, and that's what they elected me to be, and that's a leader from day one. And that doesn't mean taking somebody else's instructions and doing what somebody else says. I found that, you know, on the second to last day of session, we had a 2,000-page bill put on our desk that was a conforming bill. And in the conforming bill, which had never been heard in committee or along the way, were a lot of little provisions that had dramatic impact and effect on the future of the state of Florida. You know, the privatization of, you know, half of the prisons in Florida, tucked away in a conforming budget bill. A lot of other things that weren't really budget issues. We had bills brought to us to vote on to eliminate entire professions, such as interior designers, that had never been heard by a Senate committee, that had never been debated or offered for an amendment in the Senate, and they were presented to us in a conference bill that was basically, you can't amend, it's an up or down vote, yes or no, you know? And the Senate didn't have its stamp on that. Worst of all, the growth management bill. Now, most of you are probably against the growth management bill. I didn't really, after, you know, looking at it, didn't really see a lot of really egregious parts of that bill. Kind of just shifted more control back to the local governments, which I don't have a problem with. But the bad thing about that bill is they wanted to make that growth management bill a part of the budget and the conforming bill, and the Senate would not get a separate vote or an opportunity to amend that bill. And that's when the last Friday, or the second to last Friday of session, that's when I said enough's enough. It's too important an issue to be handled in that fashion. And so I went back to the old way of the old Senate, and from then on, you know, we had a lot of issues we dealt with. We dealt with a really serious issue, but some of those issues were about punishing people. They weren't about the future of the state. They weren't about making the state better. They were about who supported who in the last election, and let's find out who they were and let's punish them. Or who didn't do what the legislature said to do, like the Supreme Court, let's go punish them. You know, let's create 2 Supreme Courts and gut the system that we've had in this state since we were formed. And I got in the way of some of those things, and I do have a few folks up there that, you know, would really like for me my time to be up in the Senate, but I felt those things were important. You know, I didn't go back up there to get a paycheck because it's a pretty pitiful paycheck. That's another thing that's changed. It's a lot less than when I left 10 years ago. And so, you know, we didn't go back up there for the paycheck. We went back up there to try to do what was right for our constituency, but also the state as a whole. And I think we had some successes. A week or 2 after session was over, we were still, you know, dissecting what had happened in session and talking to some of the folks that had formed the different coalitions that I put together on different groups. It wasn't the same people all the time. It's different people in different coalitions. And talking to them, and some of them suggested, you know, that the way to solve the problem was not, you know, one vote at a time, but was the leadership and changing the leadership in the future of the Senate. The Senate, under the new Senate, the leadership, had embarked on an effort to try to designate presidents 8 or 10 years down the road, just like the House has done. And, you know, before we were elected, I had people that weren't even elected yet who were signing on with a Senate president for 2015, okay? And I talked a lot of them out into holding off, and a lot of the ones in my class, we didn't sign on with anybody. And so after session, some of those folks and I decided that we would make a run on changing things by electing an old guy, a retread, as president of the Senate. And so that's when the effort began. You know, I can't tell you here today that I'm going to be successful, but I can tell you that I have sure come a lot further in this effort than anybody in Tallahassee thought I would come. We have a very close race. We've deadlocked it. A lot of rumors about what may be happening. Now that we've got the Senate maps and we can look at who's in the Senate and who's pledged to who or whatever, and the people that are running for the Senate and where they're at. And, you know, I think that it was the least that I could do to try to change the system was to, you know, basically, you know, try to change it from the top, because that's how it got changed for the worse, was from the top. And what I'm trying to do is bring back, you know, a deliberative Senate, make the Senate into the independent, deliberative, moderating influence that it always has been in the history of Florida. Back in the 80s, the Florida House was a very liberal organization, very, you know, very much, you know, just very liberal. The Senate was the conservative group, and so the Senate moderated things back toward the middle, and I never heard anybody complain about that. Then, as we Republicans took control of the House became a little more conservative and whatever, and we moderated it back toward the middle, with the Senate moderating the House toward the middle in the 90s and the early part of this decade. And it's only been in the last couple years, as a result of term limits and some of the personalities, where you then had 2 groups which were really identical, really no difference. So that really cuts down the opportunity to pass things back and forth, and to deliberate and to amend and to, you know, think about things for a long period of time. And when you don't have that, you tend to make a lot of mistakes. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people ask me, oh, and by the way, just one little plug on the Senate presidency situation. It also occurred to me somewhere along those times to look up and see when the last Senate president was who was a resident of Pinellas County. And does anybody know the answer to that? 1925 is the last time Pinellas County, and we're the, what, 4th, 5th largest county in the state, had a Senate president. And so I think it's time to change that, and that's what I'm working on. Now, to talk about what I was really asked to talk about today in my last minute, because I'm sure the questions will involve around the issues, but you know, we've got just 2 or 3 major things going on. One's redistricting, and I want to, you know, I'm going to talk slow so that Dave can catch all of this and get it right. You know, the redistricting process this year has been, it's been so well handled. You know, Don Gates has handled this process very well. We had 25 hearings around the state. We had 1,700 and some odd witnesses that got up and said whatever they wanted, however insulting they wanted to be to us. You know, we sat there and we took it and we listened to them. And then we had a series of committee meetings with the wide open, in front of microphones, in front of the public, where we talked about different concepts. And we took the state and divided it into 4 sections. And we talked about each of those sections. And we arrived at conclusions, in most cases, or if not all cases, by unanimous consent. That's Republicans and Democrats. And then we took those concepts, and Senator Gates and the committee staff put them together in a bill that I think is a good bill. Now, you know, when you've got 67 counties, 18 million people, only 40 Senate districts, you know, there's going to be counties that get split. But I'm proud to say that in the Senate map in Pinellas County, there's only 1 city that's in more than 1 district in Pinellas County, and that's St. Petersburg, our biggest city. The rest of the cities are kept whole. In Pinellas County, we had testimony at our hearing in Largo from a number of the beach mayors who had one major concern, is that they wanted to be unified in whoever was their representative. Okay? Over and over they came in there and said that. We drew a map that put them all together. And just to prove that we didn't do anything to preserve incumbents and protect incumbents, of course maybe I'm not on the top of the list to get protected if we were going to protect them, but just to prove that, the Senate district that I reside in, that as it came out on the map this week, and I'm a senior member, the Senate district that I reside in only has 21% of my existing district, the district I was elected to last year. So that means next year I got to do this all over again, go out and make all new friends in North Pinellas County and start from scratch. Because a lot of the people are gone that were there the last time. So that's proof in the pudding that we didn't take into consideration where incumbents lived and which party they were. And right from the get-go, we changed 1 seat. We took the president of the Senate seat, incumbent Republican Herodopoulos, and made that into a Hispanic seat in Orlando, and which probably will be Puerto Rican and probably will be a Democratic seat. So I know you're going to have some other questions about that, and I'd be happy to answer them at this point.